Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to CDE Global Conversations. I'm delighted to have Tsakani Maluleke with us tonight and to welcome her, South Africa's Auditor-General. Tsakani was born in Diepkloof, raised in Soshanguve, and then a teenager in Johannesburg before going to Cape Town and becoming a UCT graduate. In the 113-year history of the Auditor General's office in South Africa, she is the first woman to hold the office. Tsakani, welcome to our platform, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much, Anne. I'm delighted to be here, and I want to greet each and everyone that has joined this meeting today. I'm delighted to form part of this conversation.
Great. Let's get into it. 2 weeks ago, Mpho Mafoli, the forensic auditor in Ekurhuleni, was murdered. In August 2021, the Financial Accounting Office and whistleblower on corruption in the Gauteng Department of Health, Babita Deokaran, was assassinated. These are only two of the auditors and accounting officers that have been killed in the past few years. So my question to kick us off tonight is this: is the public sector auditing and accounting function and its personnel under attack in South Africa today?
You know, and I think as South Africans, we live with a very high degree of the threat of violence all the time. And I think it is a moment for us to pause and reflect on just how often professionals who are trying to do their very best to serve society in their different roles are then put under pressure. It's not just auditors and accountants. I think if you look more broadly at what happens to policemen, to other people who deal with law enforcement, we have to find a way to deal with the high levels of crime. We have to find a way to protect each and every person that's seized with work in the integrity systems of our country, whether it's public sector or private sector. So I do hope that in the fullness of time, we get to the truth about what happened, certainly in the Mafole case, because you know that he would have worked with us for a good 15 years before he joined the city more recently, and get to the bottom of who did what and why, so that they can face the necessary consequences. And of course, our thoughts remain with him and his family.
Yes, indeed. Now, government spending as a share of GDP has surged over the past 25 years. So what exactly does the Auditor General in South Africa do? Why are you a Chapter 9 institution? And why is this office important in holding our government accountable?
As you say, government is a very important player in our economy and, of course, in our country's development. The Constitution, which is one of the very, very best in the world, set out a number of institutions that are here to support democracy, amongst them the Public Protector and ourselves as the Office of the Auditor General. So Chapter 9 sets out our role as being to audit and report on how public finances are being managed by those that run public institutions on our behalf as citizens. So our job is to audit every single public institution every single year, to do so independently. And that's why Chapter 9 is so emphatic in pointing out the independence of the audit office, because for us to give assurance on how credible the information that's being presented is, we must be and be seen to be independent. So much like in the private sector, you have an independent external auditor. It's pretty much the same thing, only more important, I believe, because when we audit, it's about, yes, looking at the very big player in the economy and in the state of governance. And ours is to, if I look at it, I say our reports really are directed at 4 or 5 key constituencies. So first of all, our reports will be directed at citizens because they must know how the public institutions that have been set up to serve them are being actually managed by the people appointed as the stewards of those public institutions, so that they too can hold public officials accountable. They also serve the parliamentarians because they are the public representatives that oversee how government runs. Our reports are also directed at the executive authority, which is the ministers, because they oversee and supervise how the departments that are in their ambit of authority are functioning. And then, of course, they are directed at the management of different departments, because our work is about giving credible, independent information that can help people run institutions better and, of course, hold those that run those institutions more accountable.
Well, very important job. Now, as I understand it, South Africa is one of the few countries in the world where the Auditor-General is constitutionally mandated to audit every single public institution annually. This is an enormous job. What kind of power does that give your office, and how do you use it?
So you quite rightly say that the law provides that we must audit every single public institution. So I don't do it by myself. I've got a staff that is 4,000 strong, over 900 of whom are qualified chartered accountants, members of the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants. So highly qualified people who are tasked with running these different audits. We conduct over 1,000 audits every year because they cover provincial government, national government, state-owned entities, but also municipalities, and we have to audit them every year. And then our annual audits cover 4 things, which sometimes gets lost. So whilst the private sector auditor will look only at the financial statements, the law provides that the Auditor General must look at, yes, the credibility of financial statements. So we say our opinion is that these financial statements are credible or not. It also covers the performance report. So we say whether that performance report, the report card of what has actually been done in accordance with mandate and the stated objectives, right? Whether that's reliable. And that's quite important because public institutions are more than about debits and credits and getting that right. They're also about demonstrating what they've done in response to what citizens want and need and what we've all agreed is going to be important. The third thing we have to audit against is whether or not in the course of deploying public funds, the rule of law has been observed. So we look at whether or not the key laws and regulations that relate to financial and performance management have been observed. And that's, again, very important because legislators who set the rules of how government should run want to know that the people running government affairs are observing those laws. And also citizens want to know if the people running public institutions on their behalf are doing so in accordance with the rule of law. And then the fourth thing every one of our audit reports also covers is a statement on the state of internal controls. And that's a provision of law. Why I want to highlight the full ambit of what each and every audit report tells us is that it gives us a very unique perspective on an entire institution. But importantly, because we audit all institutions, we cross institutional boundaries, we can give you a sense of what's happening in a sector, in a minister's portfolio, in a value chain of service delivery. We can give you a sense of what happens throughout the whole of government. So every year you might have seen that we'll have a report that deals with local government, and then another time of year we'll deal with provincial and national government. That gives you a full sense of our own analysis, independent of what are the systemic things, the problems, the weaknesses, and opportunities for improvement that stand in the way for us to actually optimize performance, accountability, transparency, and the strength of institutions. It's a very unique perspective. It is one that is the envy of many other auditors general across the world. In many ways, we are setting the benchmark for how it is that an auditor general can add value into the system of governance because of this unique perspective that we have. And so what we do, we are able to give the people that run individual institutions that oversee portfolios, as well as people who look at the entire machinery of government, a perspective from someone who's outside of government, but who sees government every single year. And of course, we've been given new powers, I'm sure you've heard, which augment our suite of things that we can do. About 6 years ago, the law was amended to essentially firm up our ability to follow up on the implementation of our recommendations. And so what we do is we'll issue a material irregularity if something has gone wrong, and we can see that it has a financial loss, or it's causing harm to the public or an institution. So let's call it something really serious with a very serious impact. Then we can raise it more sharply and follow up on how it's being implemented. And so our audit report also covers that aspect on MIs. And I do want to say that the fact that we've got these follow-up powers has augmented the nature of the institution in terms of best practice. We operate at the very cutting edge of what makes for an independent and effective Auditor-General or Supreme Audit Institution. You might know that the World Bank rated the AGSA as one of 2 countries that they assessed from different countries across the world as that enjoys full independence. And that's because of how the Constitution has designed us, the enabling legislation is designed, but also the type of support that we continue to enjoy from the legislatures, from society, from government as well.
Great. Well, that all sounds impressive. Let's dig deeper into the state of our country and how you're sort of seeing things and what's being revealed through your audits. You've said that many municipalities are in dire straits, and we all know that. What are the most common problems you keep finding in local government audits?
You know, when we look at local government audits, we have summarized this into 3 critical problems. One is about governance failures, and that's looking at the role not just of the people who run the municipality, as in that they're the management led by the city manager, right? It also looks at the role of the council, the role of the mayor, because the design of the governance arrangements in local government puts tremendous responsibility and authority in the hands of the council led by the speaker, as well as in the hands of the political executive leadership led by the mayor. So we don't look only at the accounting officer who's the municipal manager, but also at the role of council. And what we're seeing is that when a council is unstable, ineffective, it does translate into serious governance lapses at the level of the administration. We also are careful to look at the role of provincial government and national government as to whether or not they're fulfilling their roles. But in a nutshell, we see governance failures, especially in the area of council. We're also seeing that when you've got a strong council, you are able to drive improvements, and then the reverse is true. When you've got a dominance of these governance failures, you are unable to build institutional capacity. Because here's the thing, and a weak or unstable council is unlikely to attract and retain the services of competent administrators and make sure that they do their work well and hold them accountable. And so you can't build the institutional capability that you need. And also, when you got a weak council, you don't see consequences for wrongdoing. And when that happens, you then have a culture of impunity. So this is where we're landing, having analyzed our audits of local government for many, many years now. I've been in the audit office for 13 years now, looking at this thing every which way, and also building on the work of my predecessors. And we've ended up at this analysis that says, at the end of the day, we've got to deal with governance failures, because if we don't do that, you never have the institutional capability that will make sure you get your projects in the ground on time, at the right quality, at the right price. If you don't have institutional capability, you're going to have poor financial management practices. And that's why not only do you get your debits and credits wrong, but also you end up with huge financial viability problems. You don't pay your creditors on time because you're earning cash. You approve unfunded budgets. You end up with unauthorized expenditure or spending money on things you shouldn't be spending on. Performance becomes a problem because you're not even planning to, let's say, do the very basics like maintain your infrastructure. So then service delivery suffers. So in a nutshell, I'll go back to those 3 things. It's governance failures, which need attention if we are to build institutional capacity, and if we are to make sure that there is consequences for wrongdoing, because that's how you're going to start building a better culture.
Now, you recently said that since 2021, we have consistently highlighted the lack of careful spending and the eroding of the limited funds available. Funds, including grant funding, are spent, but service delivery does not improve. So what's going on exactly? What are you finding out? What are you finding out that's really concerning?
So we're finding that basic management disciplines are not in place. So it starts with planning for performance and making sure your budget matches up to the performance objectives you've set. And those performance objectives must give expression to the critical things. We're going to maintain our infrastructure. We're going to build these new projects. We're going to deliver water quality at this level, those sorts of things. And if you don't have those things planned for properly, you're not going to meet them. And in fact, you're not even going to have the money available to actually give expression to them. We're finding that because financial muscle is deteriorating, because as the economy suffers, consumers don't pay as swiftly, but also when you get poor service delivery, people are less likely to pay. And then, of course, you also don't have enough economic activity. You don't have businesses that are operating in that environment because of long periods of service delivery failures. So municipalities are getting less and less access to cash. And so what then happens is they keep their expenses are crowding out the key things that they should do. So they forego what you and I would expect. And then they do other things like employ a lot of people, but they don't do what they're supposed to do, such as making sure they maintain infrastructure and deliver services. So what we keep saying is that when you've got grant funding that's being availed into an environment where financial management is poor, things that happen there are things you would not expect. One, that grant is then deployed towards paying for expenses, other expenses, because the budget was so bad. So whatever cash comes into the system, it's then used to pay last year's creditors, last year's ESCOM debt, or even pay for something that was not even budgeted for. So it's misspent. Another thing that happens is even when it is spent, it's not spent well, because the disciplines of planning projects properly, monitoring projects properly, making sure that you appoint the right contractor and monitor that contractor properly, those disciplines are not there. So money is spent, but the delivery is lacking. So maybe you could think about the road in the city of Johannesburg that's being rehabilitated. We're still waiting for it to be rehabilitated, and you would have noticed that there was a contractor that was appointed, and then the process of appointing that contractor had actually flouted procurement regulations. That contractor was unable to deliver. They then had to appoint a second contractor, and now the project is going to cost more and it's being delayed. And we see that in many, many municipalities across the country. So then it means even the grant funding you do have, you're not spending well, the quality of your spend is very poor. And then what happens is that your infrastructure continues to deteriorate. Your ability to generate money out of service delivery continues to deteriorate. You lose water and electricity because you've got leaks, especially in your pipes, right? Because your infrastructure is not well maintained. So service delivery suffers, but also the financial health of the municipality continues to deteriorate.
So the question then becomes, why do so many municipalities continue to receive poor or disclaimed audits year after year, despite repeated recommendations from your office? For example, in your latest report, you indicate that the overall audit outcomes of metropolitan areas, there are only 8, have continued to regress since 2020-21. How do you feel about that? What does this mean? What does it tell you?
Well, it tells us that even up to the level of metros, we have not yet built our municipalities into institutions that are strong and capable of doing what they're supposed to do. And so we emphasize the message on metros because metros are the ones where these are big institutions operating in the cities where they can afford and are able to attract and retain good talent to do their work, right? And yet we find tremendous problems in metros. And then if you see problems in metros, you see similar problems in smaller municipalities. Only one of the 8 metros attained a clean audit, and that is the city of Cape Town. And by a clean audit, what we're saying is that the financial statements are credible. the performance report is reliable, and there have been no non-compliances that we found that are significant. Does it mean things are perfect? No, but it tells you the basics are in place. And that's critical. And that should be the norm for every public institution. And so to have only 1 out of the 8 metros attain that critical clean audit status tells us that there's a lot of work we're going to have to do to build metros into the type of institutions that are more likely to do what we expect. Out of the other 7 metros, 3 had unqualified audit opinions in that they got their financial statements correct. But as I explained, that's just one part of what a metro or any public institution should do. The others could not get, so other than City of Ekurhuleni, City of Joburg was unable to even prepare credible financial statements when we began our audit. One might say that's a trivial point. It's actually quite important. It tells us that in the City of Joburg, as significant as it is, they don't have the key controls to ensure that they have quality, credible, regular financial statements. That's what it tells us. So it tells you financial statements, such financial management is really poor. You've got 4 qualified audits amongst the metros. And in the qualified audits, you'll find the performance information is like so poor, it's disclaimed. We couldn't even say there was any credibility to the performance report. You find that the projects are poorly managed. You find tremendous leakage in terms of just general financial statements and financial health. What it tells us is that we have a long way to go before we've built municipalities into the type of institutions that we envisaged them to be when we gave them this authority, this level of responsibility, and gave them access to the resources we did. The good news is that the disclaimers have come down. A disclaimer of audit opinion is when we say that the financial statements cannot be supported by documentation. So this is not a skills problem, I often hasten to add. Someone with a disclaimer of audit opinion is not suffering from a skills deficit. It's just maintaining the records you're supposed to have when you're looking after other people's money. It's as basic as that. What does it tell us? The culture and the tone of the leadership is inconsistent with that of people who are acting as stewards over public funds. And that we must always push back against.
Well, some would say you're extremely diplomatic, so let me push a bit harder here. Many South Africans feel that there are no real consequences for officials who waste or misuse public money. If year after year, a city, for example, receives a qualified audit, what powers do you have? Can you fire anybody? What powers does your office have to enforce accountability, and are they sufficient? One journalist said, "Are your recommendations mere suggestions?" So let's get to the nub of it. What you're telling us is horrific, that public money is being spent appallingly, or you don't get all the information you're supposed to get, whether it's deliberate or lack of capacity or just inadequate accounting. What's going on here, and how much power do you actually have at the end of the day?
Start with the power, and then I'll come back to what's really going on here. So our powers are to audit and to report. And then they were augmented to say follow up. And in following up, because you never step into the shoes of the people running the municipality, you are independent as the auditor. So by following up, you impress upon the accounting officer that they need to act on this particular thing. And if they give you feedback that indicates that they are going to deal with the matter, it's important to give them the opportunity to do so, because that's their job. So the accounting officer would be the city manager or the director general in the department. And then if they act in accordance with what they said they would do, then you leave them be. You just keep following up to see that it's ultimately dealt with. Only if they don't act, then we can do something else. One, issue a stronger recommendation, which ends up in the audit report, which is then for the attention of Parliament or the Council or the provincial legislature. We can then also take remedial action which then is more compelling them to act in a particular way. So things we've done are to take remedial action about insisting that they discipline someone or insisting that they refer a matter to law enforcement, which is something they should be doing anyway. The other thing we can do is refer a matter for investigation ourselves. And what we've done, we've been able to refer matters to the Hawks, to the SIU, in other instances to the Department of Water and Sanitation, so they could report accounting officers and mayors that were not acting in accordance with their responsibilities on matters related to protecting our water resources, for example. We've also been able to refer matters to the public protector as well. What that does is it then allows those people to act in accordance with their powers. We've seen some people arrested when we referred matters to the Hawks, and then the prosecutorial processes must then ensue. We've seen monies brought back to the fiscus when we've reported matters to the SIU, because then they can investigate and take matters forward. And so what the powers do is they are complementary by their very nature. We can never take over the role of law enforcement. You don't want an auditor that raises a finding, arrests, and prosecutes somebody by themselves. That would lead to unjust ways of being as a society, right? So I believe our powers are adequate in terms of the auditor. If I look even at our international peers, there's not much more that we would need for the Office of the AG. What we need to do as Office of the AG is keep getting better at working with other public bodies, such as through the referrals to other public bodies, so that they can then take matters forward. What we also need, so maybe to get back to what's going on. What's going on is that, in our analysis, the people entrusted with running public affairs are not always acting in our interest, and they are not held accountable. Because here's the thing, by the time the AG comes to audit, there have been reviews by a mayor. So you got to ask yourself, why is a mayor allowing an unfunded budget to pass? Why are they allowing unauthorized expenditure to continue to be incurred? Why are they allowing a situation where key creditors such as Eskom are not being paid and other things are being paid for? What are they doing? Because the law says they must monitor the implementation of the budget. Then you've also got key questions about the role of the speaker and the role of council. They're supposed to hold management accountable when things go wrong and make sure that management is responding to the previous year's audit outcomes. They often don't. Now, the question is, do we have in the seats of mayor, speaker, and council people who know what they're supposed to do, are equipped to do what they're supposed to do, and are disciplined enough to execute on those functions? Our analysis suggests that in far too many instances, that's not the case. And then the law also provides that provincial government has particular responsibilities. When a municipality has a performance plan, their SDBIP, their annual performance plan, it's supposed to go for review by the Provincial Department of COCTA. So the MEC for COCTA is supposed to review that document. And together with the provincial executive, they're supposed to check whether that plan coheres with the plan for the province, because they are in charge of the development of the province. Now, we found that often they don't do that. They might tick a box and say, we've seen the plan, but you never see any evidence that there have been suggestions of what needs to be amended so that there's coherence for a province. And no wonder then some of these plans are cut and paste jobs by consultants, and yet they pass. And then when they're being implemented, all manner of adjustments are made during the year, which run into a different course, far away from what should be the case. So you end up with things being built like, let's say, a lot of sports stadia when water infrastructure is degrading. So you got to ask yourself the question, the people that are supposed to monitor and supervise local government, where are they? Where's the provincial legislature? When we've gone into this, we've checked, does provincial legislature even look at the reports that they're supposed to get? First of all, we found many of them didn't know they were supposed to get certain reports, let alone look at them. And sometimes they got them, they didn't know what to do with them, they didn't do much with them. Where I'm going with this, Anne, is that we've got to look at different players in the ecosystem of accountability. In our analysis, local government is, yes, a different sphere of government from provincial and national government, but they're not meant to be autonomous. They're not meant to operate as islands. where no one else oversees and supervises, because these are public resources. And so we found too many municipalities continue to do things that nobody really holds them accountable for. And then they all wait for the AG to come every year, say the same thing, they all lament, and then we start the thing again next year. In the middle of the year, there are specific duties given to all those players whose identities are sort of given. The executive leadership, the council, the provincial executive, the national executive, as well as the provincial legislature and National Assembly. They are supposed to be doing certain things. And what we found is that that rhythm has not been in force. And so we keep sort of spiraling instead of correcting things on a regular basis.
I take your point about an ecosystem. I'll come back to that. Thank you for that detailed response. Do you think, and I also take your point that the Attorney General, the Auditor General's powers need to be, can't be as wide as some people might want them to be, because we have faith in the particular Auditor General at the moment. So in your wildest moments, are there powers you would like to have that you think are appropriate for an Auditor General to strengthen what you do and give it teeth? And are there Auditor Generals in other countries that have additional powers you don't have?
So I don't believe we need to have new additional powers. I think what we have is adequate. There are things we can keep getting better at, especially around working more closely with law enforcement and other public bodies, and also flagging our messages so that the people that need to act are equipped to do so. And we try hard, such as the focus now on the executive leadership, so that we don't focus only on the administration. Other AGs, what we've seen is that you've got old arrangements, and that used to be the case in South Africa with what was called the Exchequer Act, where the AG could be part of the approval process for particular expenses or that's and have some authority on the expenditure side. I don't believe that's appropriate, certainly not in the design of our public finance management framework. Other institutions that look like us have got these powers of even issuing a certificate of debt to an accounting officer that has failed to do what he or she is supposed to do. We've got those powers. I haven't yet issued a COD, but we do have those powers. In fact, it's one of those things that becomes very difficult for any AG to do, because then you spend most of your life in court. What our experience in the last few years is that accounting officers, where we are zeroing in towards issuing a certificate of debt, they get moved around. Because remember, we don't hire them and we don't fire them. So what you find is that a council will keep that role very unstable, make someone act for 6 months, make another one act for 6 months, and then it just delays the process. So it might delay the AG, but worst of all is that it continues to weaken the institution.
And it must often be deliberate, is what you're implying. Now, you've talked about this ecosystem. You've said the mayor has a big role. The speaker in a council at local level has a big role. The provincial legislature has a role. The provincial government has a role, many of which are not playing their appropriate accountability supervisory roles. But recently you also called on the Speaker of Parliament. Can you explain what role the Speaker has and what issue you were trying to deal with and what you think they should have done that they didn't do?
And that letter, I think you're referring to a letter that I sent to the Speaker. That's a letter I send to the Speaker every year. It's just that this time I think it hit the media, and I think there was particular interest in it. The law provides that as the Auditor General, I'm accountable to Parliament, right? And so when I have delayed in concluding an audit, I must quickly indicate that to the Speaker and indicate why. So the law provides for that. And sometimes I've delayed because I've not received the financial statements. So I must indicate to the Speaker that these municipalities have failed to submit their financial statements in the time frame that has been legislated. And then I asked her to then refer the matter to the relevant portfolio committee so that that portfolio committee can deal with the oversight responsibility, follow up with the provincial leadership, follow up with that municipality. Perhaps my letter this time around had a little bit more passion. And it's because I do believe that we should be much more impatient with municipal leadership that just simply doesn't submit financial statements, because these are public funds. And so the very least you can do, even before we talk about whether these financial statements are credible, the very least you can do is submit a set of financial statements. And I do want to assert that it's something we should never tolerate. That and disclaimers are things we must leave behind. 30 years into our democracy, that should not be our experience.
So you report to the Speaker of Parliament in this annual letter, but does the Speaker then have any powers to do anything about it? So if NSFAS refuses to give any financial statements year after year after year after year, who has power to act here besides the minister responsible? What role can the Speaker play in Parliament? What role can Parliament play?
Parliament would at the very least be able to call the minister to come and account on why it is those financial statements haven't been submitted and what it is that he or she is doing about it. Yeah.
Right. Let's go back to the cities. And you tell us that major cities awarded tenders worth more than R1 billion to suppliers with close ties to municipal employees or councillors, with the city of Johannesburg leading the way in this terrible practice. I think this is against the law, or it should be against the law. But if we know this information, who is responsible for allowing this to happen? And who is not acting? Is it the mayor, or what's going on here that this is allowed to continue year after year?
So maybe let me clarify. So the law prohibits council members and employees of the municipality, as well as employees of other state bodies, from entering into contracts with the municipality. So that's prohibited. And then we would flag it as irregular expenditure because it's non-compliant with the law. The law does not prohibit the municipality from trading with family members of a councillor or an employee. What they're supposed to do is to report where they have traded with such people. So especially if the transaction is of a value over 2,000 Rand. And that's important because you want to see as a citizen to what extent there is trade between family members and the municipality. And if it's disclosed as a resident of that city, you can take a view as to what you make of the state of governance and the state of ethical practices in that municipality. The 1 billion Rand related to transactions between the city and contractors that had close relationships with employees and or councillors. Why that would be is because the city has allowed that to happen, and or there was lack of disclosure by the contractor or the supplier, and the city didn't have enough control to find that out before they entered into the contract. It's undesirable because it creates a series of conflicts and raises questions as to whether or not that contract is truly in the interest of the city or in the interest of the individual concerned. And that would have to be investigated, and the council takes a view. So
do you think it should be outlawed? How wide would the circle go in your view?
So I think, I don't know that you can outlaw family members from dealing with the municipality. For example, they could be providing catering services, right? But I'm not sure that a contract to the value of R1 billion is appropriate. It just looks wrong. And that's probably not so much a matter of law, but a matter of governance and what the council tolerates. The city of Joburg, as you would have seen, has high levels of irregular expenditure year on year. And it doesn't seem to be a situation that's getting under control. And so it raises questions about whether the council, the speaker, the mayor are decisive in
Well, and the
setting a
procurement
culture.
laws, surely.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
way transparency of procurement and so on. Let me
yeah.
ask another question. I'll come back to procurement if we have time. You've talked about examples, and the one that struck me was in the energy and water training sector, where 700 million rand was paid for a service provider for training that was never delivered. And we've all heard about this kind of phenomenon. The question in my mind is, why does government pay people before they've got the service? I've never heard of this in the private sector. You pay after you've got the service. Why would government be allowed to do this?
You know, sometimes they do it when they are trading with somebody who doesn't have the resources to start off the project. Perhaps they've taken the view that this is a small supplier that needs some cash to start the project. It's allowable in terms of the Treasury regulations. Remember, the AG doesn't set the rules, the Treasury does. So the Treasury regulations allow for prepayments only if the underlying contract provides for it. So in this instance, the underlying contract would have provided for this prepayment. It's a significant amount of money.
And the entire amount. That's also.
We flagged it as an irregularity, and we flagged it as a material irregularity, and we compelled the Energy and Water SETA, the Sector Education and Training Authority, to act on it. They are currently engaged in mediation between themselves and the supplier to see how much money they can claw back. It's a practice that's undesirable because we've seen it in a number of places, especially amongst the SETAs, because many of their transactions tend to be cash-based, and then they'll enter into a contract and then send cash into a service provider. And then sometimes we've seen instances where the training is not provided, or you can see there's very little value for the money that's been sent out, which then tells you that there's been unethical practice and that there's been significant leakage, and quite deliberately so.
Let's turn to, is there any good news? Are there examples where all the work that you've done has resulted in real changes in a municipality, in a government department, in a public institution? Give us some examples that keep you going.
So I said to you earlier that the disclaimers are coming down. So a combination of us raising disclaimers very sharply and helping people understand that beyond what sounds like a technical explanation, it tells you about somebody who just doesn't care for any transparency and accountability on how they've dealt with public funds. We raised that you're flouting the law. We used our powers to compel people to act. And so a combination of those things has led to some success. We've now come down from 28 disclaimers a couple of years ago to now 14. That's still 14 more than we should have, but it's progress. And so we're going to bank that, and that because that keeps us going. When you talk about the energy and water SETA, well, some of that money will come back. Not all of it, but some of it will come back. We've raised these material irregularities. We've seen some money coming back. It's in the order of about 20% or 15% that we see coming back of what we raise, which then tells us that we should all be focusing on building controls to prevent these problems in the first place. We should be putting in place people who are not going to enter into these strange prepayments in the first place. And then if they do happen, we must pick them up quickly and deal with them quickly before the money disappears. So what keeps us going is finding every which way for us to identify these things quickly, to pick up where the systemic weaknesses are, and to try and encourage the right improvement. Some of the things that we've done, which excite us, are that we've been able to get people to attend to projects that were going the wrong direction because we picked up on it, to sort out wastewater treatment plants so people now get better sanitation services in their municipalities, to sort out landfill sites, because we said, look, you're causing harm to the public because you've left this thing to operate outside of the licensed conditions. And so then people fix that, and then it improves the quality of life for people in that area. So beyond getting some money back, which is quite significant. I think we're now counting 4.5 billion rand that's come back if I combine PFMA, which is provincial national government, and MFMA, local government. So that's
over what period?
over the 5 years that we've been doing this. To my mind, that's a full year of AG audit fees across the country. So that's a pretty big contribution for something that we were not initially geared up to do. So we take our wins, but we know that there's a mountain ahead of us, and it's going to take not just the AG's office, but better, more efficient action by different players. Some I've mentioned, and others I would include the law enforcement agencies as well.
Mm. Are there any mayors around the country or municipalities, the institutions that consistently do well? In your view, are there some good news stories in terms of financial management around the country?
Let me put it this way, instead of putting it with personalities and names, if I look at the clean audits, where institutions maintain clean audits year after year, for me, and for the rest of the team that I lead, it tells us that the things we've been highlighting as desirable are indeed achievable, right? So when you look at Midvaal here in our own province, Midvaal as a municipality has had clean audits for over a decade, consistently. And I mean, there are a few others across the country that have had clean audits for many years and maintain them. And if I say the names, you'll be able to link them to better experiences when you are in those environments. For example, I mean, so to make it practical, so I spent some time with the team I lead here in Gauteng, and I said to them, tell me about what it's like to audit in Midvaal. And they said, one of the guys puts up his hand. He says, no, he's on the team that audits Midvaal, but his biggest problem is that when he is on that audit for those 3 weeks, he gets speeding fines. So I said, what's the problem? He says, no, the roads are so good. I'm constantly getting speeding fines. And another one said, look, the municipal pool is always in good order. And so for me, it's those things that say, well, good governance does deliver better service delivery. And then the reverse is true. I mean, if you look at the Ditsobotlas and the Malutia Pofungs, and those municipalities where all of us consistently understand are badly run with horrible living conditions for their citizens. So you can link it to what happens on service delivery. Am I suggesting that everything is perfect at Midvaal? No, but there's responsiveness. There's a sense of stewardship. And that's what you want in every public institution. So without naming individuals, because I'll miss out some names and then I'll get texts that say, why did you not mention me? I think that it's evident that there are some public officials that make it their business to do their jobs, to do them well, consistently so, and to be responsive when we raise matters.
Great. Let me come back to where I've started our conversation. There have been politicized attacks on the Auditor General's office over the years. There have also no doubt been times when you've been under pressure to sugarcoat findings. How do you protect the Auditor General's independence? Is this an issue for you? How do you do it? I remember when I interviewed the head of the governor of the Reserve Bank, he said during the Gupta era, he just closed the gates and he manned the gates and he wouldn't let them in. But this is more subtle, I imagine, now, post the Guptas. How does this play out for you? How do you do it?
So, auditors don't work alone. We always operate with teams. And the work we do must be backed up by evidence, informed by a methodology and auditing standards, and that work is always checked by somebody else. So there's no one in this environment that can offer or deny a particular audit outcome on their own. It just doesn't happen. The nature of the audit process, I think, protects us in how it's shaped. I, for one, don't even sign audit reports, and I make it known. I'm deliberate about that. I have a team to whom I have provided the relevant authority, the standards, the guidance, and they are meant to do that work. So I think it insulates me as well, because I'm actually in no position to pressurize them. All I can do is ask certain questions and offer some support, but the technocrats still have to interrogate the audit evidence and arrive at a conclusion, which I never change, and nobody in this environment can ever change. So I think it does help us. Of course, the other thing that we do, we're deliberate about ensuring that we have a dominance of professionals who belong to professional bodies, because I think that allows us to have comfort that these individuals have something more to lose. Because if they do something wrong here, we can fire them, but worse, they'll lose their license to operate as professionals. So there's a higher bar in terms of getting them to do something wrong. Does it mean that we are never put under pressure by people who might try to bribe our staff or put them under pressure? That's always going to be the case. But fortunately, it's not that pervasive. We make sure that we sensitize our teams to the threats that they might encounter, and equip them with some skills on how to manage that. And of course, one of the biggest ways to do it is to make sure that if you find something, share it with the team very quickly and make it known that you're not the only one that knows about this particular issue. And I think that does help a great deal.
Great. Let me ask my last question, which is about public procurement. And we know that preferential procurement has opened a highway for corruption in South Africa, and in many respects decimated vast numbers of public institutions. So in 2024, we got the amended Public Procurement Act, and I wondered how you saw this. Does it deal with all the loopholes that you have identified, from cousins and wives and other people getting contracts to this missing gap between money being allocated to a project but the bridge is never built? How do you see the Public Procurement Act of 24, and does it go far enough? Is it tough enough? Does it deal with this highway of corruption?
I think it moves us in the right direction. I'm excited about the focus on using technology to improve controls, to improve transparency and oversight. But and I'm of the view that it doesn't matter how good a piece of legislation is, for as long as you don't build the type of environment where that piece of legislation is actually respected and implemented appropriately, then it's actually an exercise in futility. For as long as we continue to have people flout the rules and get away with it, so have these compliance findings that they trivialize and repeat, for as long as that happens, for as long as there's a culture where we tolerate people not operating in the way that we expect, then we can change the laws and have the Rolls Royce of public procurement legislation. It's not going to serve us. So I believe we need to sort out the matter about skills. We need to sort out the matter about a code of conduct and ethical conduct. We need to make sure that there are proper internal controls. There's a leadership that expects that the law will be observed, that doesn't interfere with those processes and allows people to implement those processes, monitors them and holds them accountable, so that you build a culture where people do observe the rule of law. I find we spend too much time trying to change the law and not enough time trying to understand how we're going to give effect to it.
Do you think it would help if we had, say, 5 big cases around the country of offenders who are actually charged and found guilty and sent to jail? Would that help create a better environment for all that you are trying to do? If we had more effective law enforcement and prosecution of people who've stolen money from all of us and from the poor.
Certainly would. But if I look around, so when we had the PPE corruption in the context of COVID, right? What people forget is that in a short space of time, we saw prosecutions. I think we've all forgotten. We did see people in the dock. We did see assets being seized. Money did come back. It may not have covered everything we saw that was going wrong, but within a matter of months, that did happen. And at the moment, we're watching a number of prosecutions that the NPA is dealing with, associated with public procurement matters. So there are those instances. I guess, unfortunately, there seem to be a deluge of problems and a trickle in terms of consequences that we can see.
Mm. Mm. My last question, because we've got a few more minutes. I learned a new acronym from reading all about your work, which is FWE, fruitless and wasteful expenditure. How large is this? And how much should we worry about this?
Fruitless and wasteful expenditure. Okay, so the PFMA describes it as expenditure that could have been avoided had due care been in place. So it's money that you spend, and you could have avoided that loss if you'd had better controls, if you'd monitored things better. Is it a crime? Not necessarily. I think you've got to check what the substance of the matter is. In local government, we're seeing a lot of fruitless and wasteful expenditure associated with interest and penalties paid to Eskom and to the water boards. So what's the real issue? Well, many municipalities have cash flow pressure, and so they then don't pay those big suppliers. What's the real problem? They are financially unviable because of how they're designed, but worse still, they don't manage the resources that they do have properly. They end up with a huge staff complement that doesn't do their work. Then they go and hire consultants to then do that work. So they double up on their operational expenditure. Then they run out of money, and then they're unable to pay suppliers. So is it a crime for that CFO to have paid the penalties and interest? Well, probably not. Let's get to the root of the issue. So fruitless and wasteful expenditure, we need to look at the substance of what actually happened.
Wow. Thank you very much, Tsakani. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've learned as much and enjoyed this hour as much as I have. An South African institution we can be proud of that's doing an important job. I would like you to have more power, but thank you so much for sharing your expertise and knowledge with us today. And hopefully we can see a much better situation in how the public sector manages public money in future. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Anne, and thank you very much to your listeners, and good evening to you.
Great. Thank you.